Today, we're going to talk about sports card gambling once again and what this means for the future of the hobby, because we're going to do a bit of a reaction to a video from Neo Cards and Comics. I've written down a few points from his video. I want to build off some of the things that he said and also give some counterpoints to things that he has said that have caused some concern for me around, why I'm a bit uneasy with what is going on within this hobby. Now, it is this video over here from him. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. It's one of his more podcasty feel ones where he just talks to a blank screen or to his logo screen, but he has some pretty good points throughout this and some things that I want to follow up on, right? His video was titled The Sports Card Collector versus the Sports Card Gambler, and goes on to say in his description that sports card gambling is not going away and it was always going to head in this direction. And that's sort of where some of my counterpoints are coming from. Now, to quickly recap Neo's video, I encourage you to sort of check it out for yourself, but to recap some of the main talking points, he started things off by talking about how we, as kids, we bought packs in an effort to try and chase big cards, and we were taking a gamble by going ahead and doing that. And then off the back of that, we would go ahead and trade between each other and try to build out our collections. And I thought it was interesting, his choice of words on the gambling aspect there. Like, obviously, we were trying to chase the big hit, but primarily that was being done to build out our PCs, right? Because we wanted to try and get the rare card that nobody else has, right? And I certainly did that with sports cards as a kid, in particular Pokemon, because I was around 9 years old, I think, when it released. So that was a big thing that I went ahead and tried to do. And the aspect of trading and flipping between each other, I think, was pretty cool. But ultimately, the key difference between today and versus what was then was that we were trying to build out our binders, we were trying to build out our collections, and we wanted to own this thing long term, right? So the art of buying was to try and chase. Yes, that gamble was there, but we're ultimately trying to get these things to keep long term. And that's where one of my concerns comes. We'll get to that in a second. Again, but with that in mind, Neo then went on to talk to that. The difference today, like I was about to allude to, is the economics. The economics are very different. Packs are significantly more expensive. The cards themselves are incredibly more valuable. So it's chalk and cheese trying to compare that back to what we had as kids. And ultimately, the point of his video, the key theme was that if you're a true blue collector, I think was the terminology he used. He basically said, why do you care about the gambling side? If you're just buying singles, you shouldn't care. And like I alluded to, another key point of his was kids don't collect this way anymore, so we just need to get used to it. But there's a few things to sort of unpack there. The economics are obviously drastically different. That's where some of my concerns come from, right? Because I feel, and I've said this many times, that there is so much artificial liquidity in this space. This industry is propped up by all the breaking and repacking that is going on, specifically in sports cards at the moment. TCG is not too bad in that regard just yet, but it's growing, as Neo does in fact talk to in his video as well. But I consider this to be artificial liquidity, and that's where my concern comes from, because like Neo said, if you're going out there and buying singles, why do you care how much a box of cards costs? Like, sure, you'd like to rip a box yourself because you've grown up collecting and all that kind of thing, but it's expensive. Degenerates want to go ahead and buy it. Who really cares? The reason why I care is because of what this does to the base, right? The baseline for what prices should be and shouldn't be, right? You have so much money coming in purely off the back of this breaking element that if something was to happen overnight, and I've given this example before, like regulation was to come in, or money was just to leave, right? Because nobody wanted to buy repacks anymore. Nobody wanted to buy breaking anymore because the economy shit the bed. It's like, what does that mean for all the businesses that are in this industry that are relying on that money being there in the first place? That's part of the reason why I get really nervous when I see all this breaking happening, all this repack happening without any control or oversight from these key, businesses running them, right? They do a good job here and there calling businesses out and banning people, but fundamentally, so many gaps exist that allow this sort of crazy money to keep being funneled through and process and process and process. And then, next thing you know, you got this industry propped up by all this, artificial liquidity, right? You've got all this money moving between hands, but ultimately it's resulting in people, paying ridiculous prices for boxes and cards that nobody actually wants to own down the line. When all this money ends, is there going to be, Flawless Soccer still commanding values? Because this set, was peanuts 5-6 years ago, even 10 years ago when it first released. You had Messi cards selling for like $300, $400. Like, is that going to happen again? You have other players here like Willian. I could have bought this card for $10 10 years ago. And obviously that was a lot in the sports card space. Like, that was happening everywhere, I should say. But could that happen again? And the regulars on the channel will know what I'm talking about there, right? Because I've talked about how, this artificial liquidity, this weird hype has caused people to move further and further away with what people actually want to collect, right? You've shifted away from chasing key rookie cards, chasing, game-worn stuff, on-card autos, and you've moved to all these other, athletes and positions and sports. And ultimately, you realize you're now paying, thousands of dollars for a card that nobody wanted, 5-10 years ago. So that's where my nervousness comes in with this artificial liquidity. And, with that in mind, to Neo's points as well, about the dynamic shift, what does that actually mean for collecting long term, right? If you're no longer having kids wanting to build out binders and wanting to collect for themselves and rip packs, what does that mean for collecting in 20 years' time? And I gave a good example, in my last video where we spoke about Rob from Burbank Sports Cars, right? It makes me really nervous when you're sort of shifting that focus. Like, Neo does raise some good points around, well, kids don't really care about that anymore, so we as adults should just get over it. But I don't necessarily agree with that, because I'm still pretty nervous about, what is it going to mean if cards are no longer worth money, right? We bought these things because we wanted to collect, right? We wanted to chase. But kids are not doing it for that reason. So if they're doing it for the thrill, they're doing it for the money. If the money's not there anymore, what does that mean long term? And ultimately, that makes me nervous, because it means that if that was to happen and people were to dip, you've now got people that would have bought all these things and paid all this money for things that are now, close to being worthless. And, that's very doom and gloom. I don't think that's going to happen, because there is so much money being funneled into this industry. But that's where, a key concern of mine comes from. And I want to know what you guys have to say on that one down below. And that goes to my last point that I had written down here. What is all this shift in focus going to do long term? And Neo did in fact talk about that, but it's one of those ones that I think needs to be dove into, in a bit more detail, because it makes me, very, very nervous. And there's a comment here from Neo that I think is a good point, where somebody said, Neo, you can't possibly be this naive. Where do you think singles being bought comes from? The baseboard card fairy. That's why us true blue collectors, whatever that's supposed to mean, care about the gambling situation. Neo says, as a singles buyer, how does someone gambling on wax/breaks impact you? Obviously, the first and foremost way is it's pushing prices up. And then it's that artificial liquidity piece that I mentioned a bit earlier. Like, if that money was to dip, this hobby, is relying upon that. It's relying on all this money. If you don't think it is, you're off base, because that's fundamentally the reason why Fanatics acquired Topps in the first place. And that's why they've gone ahead with Fanatics Live. It's why they've gone ahead and bought PWCC. They're doing it because they want this money to keep perpetuating. They want it to keep growing. They see it as a cash cow. And, if it wasn't a cash cow, they wouldn't be funneling all the money in, right? So I'm probably rambling and talking in circles now. But hopefully you guys get what I'm trying to say there. I feel like there's a lot of artificial liquidity in this space off the back of gambling, and that's why it makes me nervous. Not just for the immediate future, but for the long term, as well. And I've got some other points here that I think Neo towards the end said something about, my videos in the past where I've talked about how Topps is sort of grooming, the younger audience, because they're trying to funnel them towards gambling. And he goes on to say, well, he doesn't know if that's actually happening or not, or the validity of it. But what he does say is that it was always heading in that direction. But to me, that doesn't make it okay, right? Just because it's always heading there, and just because some parents are bad parents and they let their kids enter breaks, like Neo said, that doesn't make it okay to me. I don't like that Topps is doing it. And I don't like when you've got, Rob, the card father from Burbank Sports Cards, the owner, coming out and saying he's trying to push all these things and trying to fix all these things. And like I said in my last video, he has Topps in his business running a rip night, and they're giving breaking credit to kids. You can't push back on fractionalization. You can't push back on gambling and then allow that to happen. You need to be speaking up. And sure, maybe, where life is heading and where, most entertainment is heading, you're seeing gambling advertised all the time. You're seeing kids watch Barstool and all this kind of thing and get funneled into this kind of crap. But we should still be trying to control it as much as possible. And I don't like the fact that you can have a business, market things for kids, which are packs of cards, which are things for them to rip open and collect and have fun with, and at the same time trying to get them hooked on gambling down the line. That's not okay. And I would like to see some sort of a deviation between the two. Like, let's separate them, right? You can have your cake and eat it too in a situation like this if you do the right thing. And businesses not doing the right thing is what pisses me off. And that's where my frustration comes from. And like I've said a lot in recent months, breaking has done a lot of good for this hobby. It's done a lot of bad things, as I've touched on in this hobby, but they've done a lot of good things because it's brought a lot of money in. That's resulted in more and more sets being created that you and I can go ahead and collect with, right? There are so many things that exist today that didn't yesterday because this money wasn't there. And I think that's a cool thing for collectors. I think it's made, cards mainstream. I love going to all these new card shows that have popped up. There are so much more, singles for me to buy and the like. So it's done a good thing, with that in mind. But it's the businesses that have sort of been managing it that have done a really shit job. Because like I just said, you can sort of pump out all these things, but still do things the right way. The fact that Whatnot, took so long to ban backyard breaks is insane to me. The fact that Jeff Wilson didn't say anything about it until he realized he got so much blowback pisses me off, because he has the connections, he has the ability to communicate with these businesses and say, hey, this is not good enough, you need to improve. The fact that you can have, a company like Fanatics go to these card shows, go to these rip nights and put breaking credit in there for kids in the free packs they're giving them is complete bullshit. Like, that stuff should not be happening. And you don't have people pushing back on it. And, Topps do a really cool thing with this rip night, but then they go ahead and let themselves down by doing something as fucking stupid as that. And it's like, you can have your cake and eat it too. Like, okay, there's nothing wrong. You want to pump this hobby, you want to make breaking a big bloody deal, go ahead and do it. Just don't market it towards children. Like, is that too much to fucking ask? Like, this is the shit that like pisses me off because it gets muddied for no reason. Like, you don't need to be doing those things. And it's just hilarious to me how, you know, people push back on it and justify it. And to be clear, I'm not saying Neo is trying to justify that. He said the opposite in his video. He basically referred to that as bad parenting and the fact that he doesn't like it, which is, you know, a really good thing. But I hope I clarified some of my counterpoints to some of the things he raised. I think fundamentally we agree for 99% of the things, right? We both agree that the hobby's not going to change. Gambling has brought the industry to where it is today. Things have changed. We need to get used to it. But I think where we differ is sort of the impact that the current environment, the impact that the current focus of these big businesses is going to have on this hobby long term. It makes me really nervous about the artificial liquidity. I'm going to keep using those words because I think it's fundamentally monopoly money, and it's all money moving between hands. That's not ultimately resulting in, you know, an end collector. I've given examples in the past about the luxury watch space, right? I have a couple of watches I'm lucky enough to own after working very hard to purchase them. And during the pandemic, you basically had a similar shit show to what we saw in cards, but fundamentally what happened with watches was that you had so many gray market dealers that would flip watches between each other, right? They're trying to find watches for their clients, and you know, they kept increasing the margins ever so slightly. So you had watches like a Submariner selling for like 10 grand USD, now selling for like 15, 20, $25,000 USD during the peak of the boom, right? And the reason why that happened was, like I said, you had dealers that would keep bumping up little margins, right? They'd be making like $100, $200 every single time they flipped the watch between each other. And then you eventually had a situation where no collectors wanted to buy these anymore because, number one, things opened up again. You could go back to ADs and try and find these watches yourself. But you basically had a watch selling for 25 grand that was 10 grand retail, right? It doesn't make sense. And obviously people went crazy with all this excess income that they had and started buying them. But the market tanked. And the reason why the market tanked, because none of these watches ended up in the hands of a collector, right? Somebody that wanted to actually own that watch long term. Nobody's going to pay 25 grand for something that was worth 10. And that's where, you know, the parallels come with sports cards too, and what breaking and repacking has done, because people have all this money they need to try and recoup, and then they're going ahead and trying to sell it. But no collector wants to pay for an overpriced card, right? You're not going to pay, you know, 5 figures for a card that you could have got, you know, for a lot less than that a few years earlier. Or, you know, if you did, you're not going to go ahead and pay that kind of money for a card that gets released every single year, or there's multiple products and the like, right? There are no collectors out there wanting to go crazy for these kinds of things. But what sort of happened, like I alluded to at the start of the video, and that's pretty common sense within this hobby, breaking has pushed box prices so high that singles have to resell for a certain amount in order for those people to recoup their money. But nobody wants to pay those prices. So it's why I consider it to be artificial liquidity. And that's maybe, you know, an explanation I just gave that maybe doesn't make sense. If that's the case, let me know down in the comments below. But it is what it is. So anyway, I'm rambling. Please check out Neo's video. It's pretty good. I think, like I said a bit earlier, we are 99.9% on the same page. The reason why I care about gambling, the reason why I'm concerned, is because of this artificial liquidity it's created, this weird market that doesn't seem conducive for collectors to be around long term. And if collectors don't want to be here long term, it's like, well, what's going to happen to everything we own? It's going to be pretty much worthless in 10, 20, 30 years when people don't give a shit anymore. And, you know, it's interesting. So let's sort of wait and see what happens. Obviously, Tops have invested a lot of money. Many businesses have invested a lot of money in this space. So we'll sort of see what happens, right? Because they're going to want to make as much money as possible. So maybe they're going to look to correct that and fix that and fix it before it gets too, you know, before it gets worse or before bad things actually happen. But, you know, who knows? Anyway, it is what it is. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys and girls in the next one. Cheers.